Okay, welcome everybody. I am Kevin Logan. I'm the president of Clan Logan Society International, and this is the first experiment in setting up a YouTube podcast for us and for the members so that we can talk about topics that will be of interest to the membership in general and document some of the research and the other work that we're doing to help find the chief of the name and arms of Logan. And with me today on our maiden voyage here, I have Caleb Logan, who is the Society's Heritage Officer and who is really doing a lot of in-depth study on the early history of the Logans in Scotland. And then joining us is Sean Logan, who is the genealogist for Clan Logan Society International. And Sean, although he does have a depth of knowledge into the ancient Logans, he also has a breadth of knowledge across many of the Logan lines. And so, as you might guess, today we're going to be talking about the ancient Logans and how they relate to some of what we're doing today in trying to restore the chief of name and arms. So, Caleb, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, I am Caleb Logan. I'm the Heritage Officer for Clan Logan Society International. And in my role as Heritage Officer, I'm focused less on identifying the who could be potentially a chief and more so on collecting the stories and people who are the Logan family abroad, just in I mean, abroad in a time sense, not a spatial sense. So going back into the first records of them in the 1200s, all the way up to about the 1800s is generally where things cut off. And so I've been looking into those stories, collecting them, trying to present them in a coherent narrative, and that's been my focus so far.
Okay, thank you. And Sean, tell us a little about yourself.
Thank you. So, yep, Sean Logan. I'm retired now, so I have lots of time to devote to my favorite pastime, which is genealogy. And as far as the Clan Logan Society goes, I basically have two focuses, and the way you could think about it is you got sort of two sets of time, with this hand being the present and this hand being the deep past. And ultimately, my goal is to try and bring it together. So I'm doing that through two projects. My first project is I'm working with members and I'm helping them trace their lines backwards in time. And the further back we can get, the better. We're using various records and all of that. But I'm also trying to use a technique that I think is really important in genealogy and is significantly underutilized, which is storytelling. The biggest issue I find with genealogy is you get a bunch of people's names, a bunch of people's dates, and that's it. And okay, wow, great, Robert Logan of 1700. That's a long time ago, but who was this Robert Logan? So my hope is to bring those people to life, and it's easier to do going this way, and then you kind of get this area where it's really hard, and then it's easier to do over here, shockingly. And so my second project is trying to look back to some of the ancient Logans, but with a different focus than what Caleb is talking about. My focus is when you look at, let's say, Sir Walter and Robert Logan, who accompanied Sir James Douglas on crusade with Robert the Bruce's heart. How are they related to our chiefs of name and arms? How are they related to the Restalrig Logans? How are those other groups related to each other? And oh, by the way, who the heck were our Highland clans? And the answer right now is I don't know, but that is project number two. And so my hope is then we can kind of get there, and then maybe this little real cloudy area in, let's call it the 15 and 1600s, we can build a little bit of definition to it.
That's fantastic. And I like the way that the two of you have projects that align really well with one another. And I'm thrilled about the way you're trying to make the genealogies tell a story as well. That's what I think is most interesting personally, is the stories that you unearth as you start digging through the genealogy. And it does take a little bit more work. You have to
Yes.
get beyond just a birth certificate or a marriage certificate and start looking at were there newspaper articles, were there books, were there things like that, and see where you can go from there. And so I think a lot of people uh, take that as a why am I doing this? So let's talk a little bit about a little bit more about your motivations in this. So Caleb, when you got started with this, and as you hit roadblocks and you find this is a lot of work, or you're running into issues, hey, I have this I've got to do right now. How do you decide what keeps you motivated in your search?
I would say that I am always a person, or I've always been a person who likes to learn. And so I grew up wanting to learn more about Scottish history in general. And now that I'm focused on the Logan specifically, it's been really interesting being able to place the Logans in the different events in throughout Scottish history. So that is one thing that motivates me. And then also, I think one thing that I really like doing is making difficult topics more accessible to people. And so one of the things, like, I've recently gone through uh, Robert Pitcairn's criminal trials, where essentially this man, Pitcairn, went through all of the different criminal records in Scottish history and kind of cataloged them and wrote down what he found interesting, essentially. And the issue there is that it's all written in a mix of Middle Scots and English, Middle Scots and Middle English, I suppose. And so it's not the easiest to understand, but I've been working through what everything actually means, identifying different characters that they're using, whether it's, for example, Thorn, that's generally the most well-known other character that modern English doesn't use, and trying to actually nail down what everything means in a technical sense. So that's something that appeals to me and keeps me going, at least.
Then we can't hear you.
Sorry, I had some background noise and I muted myself so it wouldn't be uh, audible. Anyway, thank you, Caleb. I appreciate that. And Sean, what motivates you? What drew you to doing this sort of work, and then what keeps you motivated?
Sure. And it wouldn't be an online podcast without at least one technical issue. So,
Yeah,
um,
exactly. We'll fix that in
so,
post-production.
so I'm glad you asked me about what motivated me. So actually, what motivated me is right here in my hands,
Oh,
and it's a letter I received in 2001, March 23rd of 2001, from my grandfather John Logan and my grandmother Jean Logan. And I'm just going to read the first sentence. It says, "We are attaching a set of information about our ancestors that go back as far as the 1500s in some cases." And it goes on. And in there was hand drawn, well, let's call it typed and stuff, family trees. So,
wow.
semi manual, semi automated.
Uh-huh.
And I was reading through it, and it's like, okay, great. We go back to the 1500s. So who's my 1500 Logan? And we actually stopped at Daniel Logan in the 1800s. And
Oops.
I found that frustrating. So I decided to get into genealogy, and I had a real false start. I was, in 2001, I was a young man with children and working and pretty busy. And actually, was during that time my stepmother, Vicky Logan, actually broke through that brick wall and got us beyond Daniel to William, and David. And when I talked to her about how she did it, it was really fascinating. She was tracing, in a sense, migration patterns, people who would go from together to Kentucky to Missouri and stuff like that, and
Uh-huh.
that would give her the hints to say, okay, I think these people are related, and that sounded like really good detective work.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that was what motivated me to get into it.
Okay.
What motivated me to come here was I attended I was, before I was a member of the society, I attended it was a video presentation you all had. It was uh, presenting the search for the chief.
Oh,
And in there, I learned about the Chief Restoration Project
Mhm.
that was ongoing, and I was like, well, that was fascinating, and I immediately joined up to the society, and
Mhm.
I said, well, that's something I'd like to keep an eye on. And magically, here I am today in this role, helping to drive that forward. So you never know where life will take you.
Yeah.
And so my so I hope to bring my detective skills to help us maybe crack a few brick walls down and um, heck maybe find an actual person who is related to our last chief.
Yeah. That is the goal, right? That is the goal. And yeah, I could appreciate some of your story being handed that paper with the genealogy on it. Mine was a book in my grandfather's desk drawer that I took out pretty much every time I went to see him. And I tried to trace, okay, so I'm related to this line and stuff. And unfortunately, it didn't go back prior to the Civil War with any real facts or anything. But it's those things like that that spark us and start moving us forward, I think, a lot of time on these journeys. So, Sean, what are your thoughts on the upcoming convention? You mentioned your work in helping to find a living heir to the chiefship, and that's what the convention's about. What are you hoping to see and experience at the convention?
It's I'm very excited about the convention. Like I said, I joined the society because of my interest in the thought of restoring the chief. So um, it, I think ultimately my hope, it's a little bit of a selfish hope as the genealogist, is that when we end everything out, we have a commander who helps take us into what I'm calling sort of phase two of this search for the chief,
Yeah.
and we could talk a bit about phase one in other podcasts, especially when you have John Logan Marchbanks, who so capably led it, uh, and so I'm really hoping that if I was to boil it down to real simple and just specifically about the family convention, is that it creates a real springboard to driving some enthusiasm in the search, because I believe that the best way for us to accomplish our goals of finding a living heir is to cast a very wide net, to get people excited, to get people who aren't looking at their family history to start looking at their family history.
Yeah.
Because the reality is I don't think we can crack that nut by ourselves as a society. I don't think, four, five, six people doing all kinds of genealogical work and all kinds of discussions are going to find that living heir. I think we're only going to do that by reaching out to people and um, and getting them to participate. Beyond that, I'm hoping while I'm in Scotland that I to visit the National Archives.
Yeah.
Uh, I've got a couple things in mind. I want to get letters from Reverend Alan Logan of that ilk. So I understand that they are there. I'm hoping they'll let me get them and they'll let me photograph them. I'm not sure if they'll do that. I've also found that there's a seal for Patrick Logan of that ilk. And
Oh,
I think
really?
if we can get a picture of that, that would be great. I'm
Yes.
hoping the computer is telling me the truth and it is there. So those are a couple things I have my eyes on if I can
Oh,
make it to the archives while I'm out there.
that sounds fantastic. I may tag along or shadow along behind you. I'd love to see that seal. I think that would be really neat.
Very
And
welcome.
then, and this will be your first experience in Scotland, right? First time there?
Yeah, I was there once before on a business trip,
Mhm.
and all I saw was Glasgow Airport and IBM at Greenock, and then Glasgow Airport and home. And so, as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, I've never been to Scotland before. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah, I've made a few trips like that where, yeah, I've been there in the airport. Yeah. Uh, so Caleb, what are you looking forward to experiencing and seeing? You've been to Scotland a few times already, though, haven't you?
Yes, I have actually been 4 times before.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
this will be my fifth. But I think this time it's going to be much different. For one thing, my fiance is coming with me, so I get to show her around a bit and kind of also show her just the general kind of traditions in
Hmm.
Scottish society, especially as pertains to Clan Logan. And so I'm looking forward to that. Also, I'm interested to meet everyone that is going to be there and see where they all come from, what brought them there specifically, what made them want to be a part of this whole process. And so I think that that will be another fun aspect, just getting to know people who, I'm not used to seeing people with the same last name as me. So in this business, I suppose that's uh, the opposite. Now everyone has the same last name as me, so it should be interesting to learn from them. And I'm also kind of just looking forward to meeting people such as yourselves, Kevin and Sean, who I've had a lot of interaction with virtually, whether email or Zoom, but now can actually see each other in person. So
Yeah.
it will give the whole experience a much more real feeling. And I think that going forward from the convention, I'm looking forward to the ability to be a little bit more united, having come together and experience that and carrying that unity to making the process of finding a chief or whatever ends up happening, just to make that more complete and full and more I guess more rallying the troops kind of and putting a real effort behind it than otherwise would be there.
Yeah,
It'd be nice to see each other in 3D.
yes, it
Right
will
now
to be
you're
able to shake a hand, right? Yeah. This
right now
virtual
you're all
will
very
be
flat.
great. Yeah, and I think we're over 50 people who have signed up to attend in person. So there will be a lot of Logans and descendants of Logans who we can trade stories with and spread information, which is part of, that's part of why I wanted to try and get this done before the convention so that people, one, could meet you guys and understand. The depth of knowledge that you possess. So don't be surprised if we do get this out before the convention that you guys might be a little bit of rock stars and people are going to want to talk to you. So be prepared for that, okay?
You could talk to anyone, especially about Logan history.
Yeah. Now, if they start asking for autographs and stuff, I don't know how to advise you there, but
I don't do that.
no autographs, huh?
Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Maybe next time. Yeah. So, Caleb, uh, there's a project that you've been working on, specifically trying to get it prepared by the convention. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, how you got started on it, and then how the progress is coming along?
Yes, so this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier in my role as the heritage officer
Hmm.
in terms of gathering information about past slogans and presenting that in a cohesive narrative. So I essentially gathered a lot of sometimes primary sources, sometimes secondary sources, but a lot of material that mentions Logan's. I would essentially just do a control F, see who it's mentioning, and then finding a source that has a Logan mentioned in it, I would download it. And so I've gone through about 70 sources probably. I still have about 80 more currently on my computer to go through. So it's by no means going to be finished in a full sense by the convention, but I was able to put together a booklet of the basic information, my preliminary findings, I suppose. And what I've been doing is essentially transcribing or at least paraphrasing the sources themselves and compiling that into one Word document for myself. That way that it makes it much easier to just control F1 document instead of having to go through all of these different sources. And especially when those sources are in Latin or some, like I mentioned, Middle Scots and Middle English makes it much easier. And from that, I've been able to compile that narrative and actually cite sources that are hopefully more reliable than sources that have been used previously. And that's been my goal up to now. I've been able to go through, so I mentioned the Logans of that ilk, which means that those are the Logans of Logan, also the Logans of Restalrig, the Logans of Idbury, Oxfordshire,
Hmm.
which is so that is actually an English branch of Logans who came from Scotland, but I haven't been able to identify where because there's a Robert Logan of Little Two, uh, and that is an area in England right by Idbury, but the sources refer to him as a Scotsman, never saying where he actually came from. So
Uh,
I'm looking forward to diving more into that in the future and continuing reviewing these sources to hopefully, you know, get that. Although I have that pamphlet ready for the convention, I'm hoping for a more complete digest, I suppose, of the
yeah,
Logans and throughout history that I can present at a later date.
yeah.
Sounds like a
And
potential future genealogy project as well, looking up the history of
Mhm.
Robert Logan.
Absolutely.
yeah, and that yeah, the two of you, your roles are so interconnected that it it's not surprising that the work that each one of you is doing can impact the other's work and add to it. It won't be like a negative sort of thing. It's allowing us to build a fuller picture, which is I'm very excited about having the two of you working with us in the society on this because both of you are motivated on it, which means you're really going to keep digging and find the proper sources, good quality sources. And having seen a draft of what Caleb has ready for the convention, I can only say it really exceeded my expectations when he and I first started talking about this project. Not only does he have well documented sources in it and stuff, he includes some stuff in the research. He has maps of the areas. He has a few coats of arms, which always that speaks to me. That's my love language. Show me a coat of arms, and you've got me spellbound. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to how that continues to develop. I can't wait for you to share it with the people at the convention. I think people are going to be very happy to walk away with a copy of your initial work. So I'm excited for you,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
they
thank
may
you.
want you
And
at
I
autograph.
had to include those heraldry notes for you just to make sure it got your seal of approval. But that is actually one thing I'm interested in looking at further, just because there is some diversity among the crests that Logans have used based on the region that they came from.
Right.
So that could be another potential in terms of the genealogical research, at least, kind of
Right.
identifying where people came from.
Yeah. And every time I feel like that we've found all the heraldry we're going to find with the Logans, I come across another source that nobody has seen, and there's another Logan listed in it. And so I'm hoping that, like you said, we will have just one document eventually that has all of these in it so people don't have to go look at this source and they don't have to go look at that source. They can look at the work done by Caleb Logan and it will have the bulk of the material covered in it. So again, I'm really excited about your project. I think it's going to be very helpful for people.
Mhm. Yeah, actually,
I,
if I
I
could share one more thing on that point, one of the things I found funny, there was a famous James Logan of Stenton, which
Mhm.
is a neighborhood, well, a house in Philadelphia,
Right.
and he was actually the first mayor of Philadelphia, but he was
Mhm.
using this Logan crest, and in a letter he wrote to someone, he was like, I don't know if I have the right to use this, but I found it associated with the Logan name, so why not? And I thought that was pretty funny.
Now that is interesting because I have seen that crest, and not to get too far apart, but I thought it was interesting because it looks like it has a similar appearance to the Logans of Idbury that you are working on. It has the
Hmm.
three piles in chief, and then it has a lion. I believe they call it passant as the main charge on it, which is the Logans of Idbury. So it would be interesting to find out if the Logans of Stenton and the Logans of Idbury were related to one another,
Hmm.
which
Absolutely.
which kind of brings us to Sean and his work on the more prominent families of Logans prior to 1800 in Scotland. And I don't know, fill us in a little bit on the projects that you're working on, Sean.
Yeah, so I have a lot of projects. I'll start with the ancient Logans and up to now. So I've been with the society now for just a little over a year, and I spent um, gosh, probably about 9 months of my first year, my first 9 months, really diving into the work done by John and Peter Logan. And it's absolutely fantastic work to better understand the Logans of that ilk. So, for anyone who's wondering who were the chiefs of the Logans, it was the Logans of that ilk. That we know that for sure. George Logan registered the arms, and now we can go both ways, his ancestors and his descendants, thanks to Peter and John. So I spent 9 months really understanding them as deeply as I possibly can. Where do those lines terminate? So where do we have our brick walls that someday we hope to knock down? And where are there not just brick walls, it's just terminated? They didn't have children. And so I feel like I've got a pretty good handle on that today. Now the question is, well, who are the Logans of that ilk? Where did they come from? How are they related, or are they even related at all to the Restalrig Logans? Right? They could be related because it seems like, thanks to some of the great work Caleb you've done, you have traced some of the early Restalrigs into the into sort of the Ayrshire region, although maybe not directly into Ayrshire yet, but into the Ayrshire region. So is there that Ayrshire connection that most people claim there are? If so, is there a common ancestor of theirs? Is it and is it those really prominent, very early Logans, like the ones that signed the Ragman's roll, or the ones that signed, that was the Sheriff of Lanark? And so my next focus, the one that's highest on my list, is the Restalrig Logans. I want to, there's been some preliminary family trees put together. You've got the Logan home book that talks through it. I'd like to really detail out the Restalrig Logans and see if we can find a clear genealogical trail from the first Baron to the last Baron, that then tells us where did they go, who do they connect with, and how, and where did they come from. The issue with the Logans of that ilk is there really is no documentation on who the parents of the first chief, Alexander Logan of that ilk, may be. That is a brick wall that appears at this point to be really solidly built. I think the only way I think I can get through that brick wall is going around it and seeing if I could find something else that gives us some hints. So that is going to be my biggest project, and I'll probably dive into it head first when the convention is over. I'd like to continue to maintain time to help our society members trace their family trees backwards, because as I said, that I think is going to be the critical path to maybe identifying a chief. And even if we don't, which, in all honesty, I think the odds are we won't. I think John and Peter did a great job. So I'm going to potentially pursuing a goal that might fail, but that's okay, because even if we do fail on identifying a heritable heir, the legitimate heir, people will be able to understand where do they fit in the broader Logan family. And to do that, we've created a webpage called Clan Logan Genealogy. And my vision is someday, and it's probably going to be a decade away from now, but someday someone can go in there and type in, their earliest known ancestor. And from that, they can get a picture of where do they fit in the whole Logan family. Oh, I'm of Germanic origin, or I'm of Viking origin, or Pictish. I'm Highland. So, by the way, someday I'd like to work on the Highland Logan line. When I get to that, I don't know, but I think that's really important to do someday.
Oh yeah,
That's going to be a hard one.
What's that?
Yeah, it's going to be a hard one. Yeah.
there may be no documentation for it, potentially pre, 18, 1700s. I am going to visit in Scotland, the cemetery on Black Isle, and try and see if I can get any further hints to those gravestones that supposedly have Logans all over them. So
Okay.
I'm
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have to say, the next question is about what excites you about the future. But I have to tell you both, the what really excites me about the future and where Clan Logan Society International is going is the work that the two of you are putting together. I felt really blessed, honestly, when both of you agreed to come in and start taking part in the society. And I have just been happy, overwhelmed at the fact that you guys seem to share my vision so much on what it is you're putting together, both with doing an in-depth look at the ancient Logans of Scotland, and then also chronicling the different families, and then making that attachment to the current Logans living globally, so that people won't wind up being like I was when I first started looking into my Logan heritage and everything. And I could get back to, like I said, somewhere around the Civil War, but then after that, there was nothing there. And there are so many misleading facts that you find online, whether it's ancestry.com and other personal trees and stuff that people have put together, or just bad information that's people don't put it out knowingly that it's bad information. It's just not as well researched. And so you guys will have the well researched repository of information, and Clan Logan Society International will be the place that, if your last name is Logan, or if you have a Logan family member that you're trying to research, you'll know where to come. And not to get too far ahead of where we're going with this, but just to let people know, both of you have been deeply involved in updating the Wikipedia entries, but then also Sean has created a site on WikiTree, which we'll be sharing at the convention, that I think will be the gold source for all information related to Logan's. So I'm really looking forward to having your guys' research and then being able to share it in the broader context of things like Wikipedia, WikiTree, and then our own website itself. So that's my own personal, what excites me about the work and where we're going with it. What about you, Sean? What do you see as an exciting thing in the future for Clan Logan?
Yeah, and a quick rag. We're one of the very few societies that actually has control over our own clan page on WikiTree. So that's something we should be very proud of.
Very nice.
Uh, I am. So they trusted us to do it in the right way. So we now have control of it. As much as you control anything on WikiTree, it is a social tool.
Right.
So using that as a springboard, actually, that is what I'm excited about into the future. When I look at where genealogy was, let's say 50 years ago, you had to go to a library and destroy your eyes by looking at microfilm,
Right.
and the facts weren't always super clear. Like instead of getting access to 50 documents, you get access to 5, and you would have
Yeah.
to try and make some conclusions out of that. And we love making fun of the genealogical work people did 50 years ago, which is what loads all of those really bad trees on Ancestry.
Right.
But I'm amazed about the work that they did with the lack of technology. Looking forward, I really see technology as being a major boon for genealogy, and I see it on two fronts. And one of them, it's happening today, and I'm using it for the member projects, and it's AI. So today I can go on to Family Search, and I can do an open text search, and it will search for every, let's just stick with the name Robert Logan, every Robert Logan in Goochland County, Virginia, between 1750, and it'll pull up 50 documents, and it'll have their names highlighted within the documents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, wow, that makes my job so much easier. Now I've got to read the documents, and it's in terrible, old, script handwriting and all of that. But as you think, and this is we're in inning one of the 9 inning game of AI. So where will that take us? I think DNA as well. I'm really excited about trying to revitalize the excitement around people getting a Y-DNA test.
Mhm.
So if I think about, where do people sit, within the Logan family, the more Logans we can get to do a Y-DNA test, the clearer that picture will be. Because ultimately we're going to all going to hit brick walls on our genealogy, on our family trees. It's going to happen. A document's lost to fire, it's lost to whatever, and it's never going to come back. But the one thing that isn't lost to fire is your DNA. And through statistical models, they can take your Y-DNA and they can trace it all the way back to 200,000 years ago, to the Y-DNA atom. And that process is tried, true, and tested. I actually don't think technological advances are a big part of that. I really think it's participation in what they call the haplo trees. So if you think of each haplogroup as a person in your family tree, and it branches out, so your haplogroup came from this haplogroup, and that haplogroup branched out three different other ones, and we can trace that and say, well, I'm in this group, you're in this group. We relate back to someone who we don't know, but we know about the region in 1500. So the more we can get Logans to take the Y-DNA test, because it is a surname test,
Right.
the better we will be. And then I'll just close with, but even if I don't get those two things, I'm really excited about coming out of this convention with a commander, whose primary goal is to find a living heir, and as I said, moving us on to that phase two of our search.
Good. I couldn't agree more. I'm very excited about the potential of the unity and the broader appeal of being part of Clan Logan as we come out of the convention. And boy, do I echo your sentiment about getting people to take part in the Y-DNA testing. As you know, we've been really trying hard to promote this and find people that have good, detailed genealogical records in Scotland, which means they are either from Scotland or their family, they're only one or two generations out of Scotland. So they have that those family records that tell who they are and stuff. And if the more people like that we could get to test that still have the surname Logan, that would go so far, because we do have like you mentioned, the Logan DNA project, and we have a lot of data in there, but we don't have a lot of data for people with known trees in Scotland. So that maybe we'll get some more of that when we come out of this convention and people see that now we have a commander and we are very serious about what we're doing. So yeah, I'm very excited, just like you, for that same reason. What about you, Caleb? What do you see exciting ahead for Clan Logan in the future?
Ooh, it's a big question, I think, for me. I think one thing that has become apparent to me, at least when I was growing up, I never felt like the Logans had much place in the overarching Scottish affairs that were going on. But I think the more that I've researched into the Logans has made me realize that no, they were there all along. They were, they may not have been the king or something like that, but they were important notaries or even just bakers, whatever it may be, and they all formed a coherent part of Scottish society. And Scottish society, as we know, contributed a whole lot to this world for being the poorest country in Western Europe. So I find that impressive and something to look forward to, just uncovering more of that as we look for a chief. And one thing I'm looking forward to is that my hope is that we come out of the convention with a commander who's willing to leverage the resources that we have as a society and really focus on using those to the goal of identifying a chief. So that's something else that I'll be looking forward to ahead. And beyond that, I'm really just looking forward to being a detective of sorts. I think, like Sean, I like uncovering those mysteries and battling a brick wall, trying to break it down, or
Mhm.
maybe just run around it. I think Sean and I are both runners, so we can do that
Yes.
instead of walk. And I think the more opportunities that we have to break down those walls or get around them, the more information that will be uncovered. And so that's just a important aspect, I think, of this role for me.
I, I'm glad to hear that. And you mentioned in there uncovering some of the mysteries about the Logans and stuff, and how when you were growing up, and I had the same experience growing up. We're not really mentioned in any historical textbooks or anything like that. And over time, and with the research that I've done and that you guys have shared with me so far, it's obvious that the Logans did play a critical part. I mean, they were in the presence of Robert the Bruce at the founding and before of the nation of Scotland. And by in his presence, I mean physically in his presence and working with him, helping him to succeed and become the King of Scotland. And so I've got many theories as to why we're not talked about, but the good Sir Douglas, he is still in all the books and movies and stuff, and we were probably standing right next to him at the same time. And we can talk about that in a little bit because we are going to talk about the Gowrie conspiracy just a little bit. And so I'm really looking forward to the future where we have your work, Caleb, on the ancient Logans and the role that we played in the broader history of Scotland. And it's not just that, it was the Logan Knights with Robert the Bruce. It was the Colliers, it was the Bakers, it was the lawyers who and the ministers. I think both of you have uncovered a couple of different ministers, and I have found some in my work that supported different revolutionary concepts and the way people should be treated. And I find that fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to having those stories because, like Sean was saying early on, it's the stories of these people's lives that really brings our history to life. And that's what excites me is I think we're going to have a coherent, well-researched set of stories that we can share with people and say, see, if you are a Logan, this is where you come from. And to me, that will be really exciting in the future. The last part of our podcast today, and this may get split into a completely separate one, we'll see how it goes. I wanted to have sort of a almost a roundtable discussion between the three of us on a few different topics, and it's sort of a um, dispelling myths and fables. And I'll just put the first comment out there. When I was thinking about the podcast, I thought, okay, this is the one of the big topics. Um, Tell me your opinion of the following statement. The best source to learn about the Logans of Scotland is or is not the history of the Logan family by Major General G.J.N. Logan Hume. Uh, so, Caleb, you want to go ahead and kick off our discussion on the history of the Logan family?
Sure. I would say, I mean, it's a book that I have and have referred to, so I can't say that it's useless, but to be honest, I've only looked at it when trying to identify more primary sources. I don't care for it much as I can't use it like a primary source just because there are errors made in it. So although it helps me identify where I can look for something just to verify that it is accurately reported, I don't look for it. I don't take it at face value, essentially.
Yeah, and Sean, what would you like to add?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say the answer is both. It is both not, and it both is the best source for Logan history. And so, first of all, just to it's absolutely a secondary source, as is any book written that and I look at, this book was written around 100 years ago, um, and it is amazing to me that he was able to get his hands on the amount of information that he was able to get his hands on.
Mhm.
As I go back to an earlier statement I said, as you have limited information, you might make connections that don't exist, and he absolutely did. So that's so those mistakes and all of that is why it's not the best source. So if you take the book and you read it and you assume everything in there is factual, you're going to go down the wrong path. However, as things stand today, it is the only thorough broad-based book that is written about the history of the Logan family.
Right.
So that makes it is the best source today. I believe it is our job. Um, Caleb, you and me, maybe predominantly in our roles, but I think as a society and ultimately as the clan's job to put out a version 2 someday that will help correct some of those errors and hopefully pay homage to the great work he did, um, but make it that next evolution. And now we know more, and here's a more accurate story, just like they do in science.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I couldn't agree more with what you said about it. Right now is our best source that we have, but we know so much of it is wrong. And
Oh,
it doesn't mean, like I said, I think when I opened up the podcast here, Major Logan Hume, he wasn't trying to put out misinformation or anything. Imagine how challenging it was 100 years ago to be sitting in the archives of Scotland and trying to find records with the name Logan in it, and then also comparing that and getting and writing letters to people that were Logans and descended from certain families, and then them sending you back the stories that they knew were true about their family. And that's what you had to go on, was what they reported. And so you can see how a lot of errors can creep into someone's work when that's the type of conditions that they're working under. And like you, I I see your and Caleb's work, and the way I even talked to you about arranging it, doing a deep dive into the Logans of the ancient history of Scotland and coming forward, but then also trying to make sure we fill out the lines that we know about: the Logans of Restalrig, the Logans of Idbury, um, no, the Logans of Stanton. You mentioned that one. That was an interesting one you picked up on, Caleb. That I've got that one in my notes as well. I think these are the ones where we can really follow Major Logan Hume's pattern and the way he put the book together and say, hey, there's this family and we know this about them. Only with your guys' work and with modern technology and some better research principles applied to it, more rigorous um, research methodologies, we will be able to put together a second book, and maybe we'll dedicate it to the memory of Major GJ and Logan Hume and his pioneering work, because that's really what it was. It was pioneering work. Was it all right? No. Was it all wrong? Absolutely not. There are some really good facts in there, but you really have to pay attention when you look at that book and be careful what you say. Well, we know for certain because, no, not really.
Yeah, Caleb, you nailed you nailed it on the head, which is you got to go to his source that he cited and then check and say, does that make the conclusion that was in the book? And the answer is it doesn't always do that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it
no,
is
huge
helpful.
credit. It's a huge credit to him that he was able to compile all that information for his age. I know one thing that occurred to me recently is just in the legal profession, I have always wondered how it is that people kept on top of cases when they had to go to a library to actually look them up because there was no internet. And the conclusion that I've come to is that they didn't, to be honest. Cases went under they got swept under the rug, whether intentionally or not. And so the fact that he was able to compile all this information without the help of a computer or the internet, or even an international society that we have today is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It could take me 4 hours to transcribe a 2-page letter that's written in English,
Hmm.
but it was in the early 1800s or the mid 1700s. I mean, it's just, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's just, they would sit down, they would see all this stuff and couldn't read it and just say, yeah, let me find a different case.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you mentioned having to read it. Some of the stuff that he would have had to review, he would have had to have been fluent in Latin, or at least have some greater than just a passing ability with it, because as you've found, a lot of those early documents are written in Latin or some in Gaelic as well. So uh, the amount of knowledge that he had to have and the he was a great building block. I'll just say it like that. He was a great building block who took on an enormous task and did what I think is a competent job with it. But now, with advances in technology and methodologies, we're going to advance his work and we're going to make it a lot more accessible to people so that they don't have to wonder, well, I'm a Logan, where do I come from? So. The next one that is always interesting, and we may find out it's another one of those yes and no questions. The Logans of that ilk are or are not the Logans of Restalrig. And
Let me. I'll start
yeah,
with that
Sean.
one, Kevin, and because my answer is real simple, and then I'll see if Caleb has anything to add. Which is the answer is we don't know. They're not the Logans of Restalrig. They are two different lines. Whether those lines are connected in the 1300s, we don't know. The interesting thing is the Logans of Restalrig are much more famous, but they weren't chiefs, but they were barons. So they probably were way more wealthy than the Logans of that ilk, who, from what I could tell, were more upper middle class, but were absolutely the chiefs.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree with that completely. For some historical context, for those who don't know, the Restalrig is a neighborhood in Edinburgh, and the barony of Restalrig included that neighborhood area, really a pretty extensive amount of land, including the area of Leith and Leith Harbor. So that was an important aspect to it. And the Restalrig Logans actually got that land because the last laird of Restalrig, as it was under the Restalrig family at that time, generally called the Lestalrigs. Um, he passed away, and his daughter was married to a Logan. So where that Logan came from, who ultimately became the first Baron of Restalrig, we just don't know, and that'll be hopefully, another brick wall to run around.
Yeah. And this is where Kevin's going to jump into his heraldry again and say, and you can look, there are definitive coats of arms that were held by the Logans of Restalrig, and they don't look anything like the coat of arms that the Logans of that ilk registered in 1672. Now, did they look like the coat of arms that the Logans of that ilk had, we think, available to them in like the 13th century and moving forward? Yeah, there's similarities. And that's where you really start to see that maybe these all were one family, because you find that, oh, all of them had 3 piles sable, whether it was in chief or that was the main charge on the shield. And some of them shortened those 3 piles in sable just into the chief, and then they would add a main charge to the shield, whether it was the lion passant, or in the case of the Logans of that ilk, it became the heart of the Bruce. Now, what it was before they were given permission by the Bruce's grandchildren to add his heart to their shield, we're not sure yet, because again, that was what was registered in 1672, was the heart with or the shield with the heart and the 3 piles in red piercing through it. And so, yeah, there's a lot that you can say that from say 1672 forward, we know the Logans of that ilk and the Logans of Restalrig were two completely independent families. But did they merge somewhere earlier than that? We don't know. And it could be that as we work back that way, we do find out that if we can get through the Logans of Restalrig line, maybe that's where the heir to the chiefship comes from, but it will be from a much earlier time than 1672. And the thought that most of the Restalrig line has passed away seems to hold true right now. So finding an heir coming via that line will be just as challenging as it is finding it coming from any other line. And it's probably going to come down to what you said early on, Sean. I believe it was you saying we really need Logans with good written histories of their particular family to start sharing that information with us so we can compare and see, where did this line break off from? Are you really part of the Restalrig line? John Marchbanks, who we all mentioned because of the groundbreaking work he did, his family, the Logans that he descends from, they did descend from the Restalrig line, but it took many branches after they descended out of Restalrig, and then eventually his grandmother was the last of the Logans in his line, married into the Marchbanks clan. So that's a little bit there, but that shows you what happens over time, and that's how it can be so challenging to say that the Logans of Restalrig are or are not the Logans of that ilk. There's a lot to unwind in that sentence.
Yeah. I'd like to build on two things
Sure.
you said there.
Sure.
So you mentioned about what we do and what we don't know. I will say the one thing we do know is in the history of the Logan family by Logan Hume, he states that the Logans of that ilk descended from Robert Logan, the last Baron. We know that's not true because Robert Logan lived between 1555 and 1606. In 1516, Patrick Logan asked Alexander Logan of that ilk for a precept of the king. Right. So that predates the last Baron. So we certainly know that if there is a connection, it's way before 1516.
Right.
So not only is it not in the 1600s, it's not in the 1500s. And then I'll just add to the last thing. John, who is a fantastic genealogist, I think he has also told me that there is still some work to do to validate whether his connection to Restalrig is indeed completely factual. Right. I'm going to say this as the stickler as a genealogist. There are 0 verified lines today that go back to Restalrig Logan. I would be super excited to find one, just as I'd be super excited to find one to the Logans of that ilk. But today there are 0 that are verified.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting, the Logans of Stanton that you referred to, Caleb, the Logans that are in Pennsylvania that kind of formed out of the Logans of Stanton over time, they are one of the groups that some of them believe that they are descended, the Logans of Restalrig. And so it's not just one particular side or another. This is what happens, I think, and has been explained to me. You had such a fabulously wealthy and well-known branch of the family, like the Restalrigs were. Like Caleb said, they owned the port of Leith. I mean, you don't get much more important in Scottish shipping than owning the port of Leith. And so it's not surprising that when people started to talk about the Logan history, oh, well, my last name's Logan, I must be descended from the Logans of Restalrig, because that's the one people knew about. And it's easy enough to see where they could confuse the Logans of Restalrig must have been the chiefs, because they were the most prominent, the most successful, the most wealthy, things like that. And it's just not the case. And that's what people have to bear in mind when they start talking about we're going to find the chief through the Logans of Restalrig line, is they were a completely separate branch. I'll say that they were a completely separate branch by the time George Logan of that ilk registered his arms. And you have found through your work, Sean, that it even goes back further than that. that they were a completely separate branch. And so that's what we have to keep in mind. We know absolutely they were a completely separate branch at certain periods in history. Now, how far back have we gotten? Not far enough. So, anything else to add to that, Caleb?
I
Okay.
think you covered it all. That was excellent.
Okay. And then the next one, the Logan Knights who accompanied the good Sir Douglas on the crusade to the Holy Land were or were not the progenitors of the Logans of that ilk, meaning they were the guys who kicked off the entire lineage of the Logans of that ilk. Was that true or was it not? Uh-oh.
I don't know, Caleb. Have you found anything that would back that up? I mean, I like to believe that it's true, but there's nothing to verify that.
Right. There's absolutely nothing that I've found to make to say one way or another, really. I mean, they were never referred to as Logans of that ilk.
No.
So they were just called sirs. So we knew
Okay.
they were knights, or we know they were knights, but beyond that, very little is known about them. Even, I mean, you could point to their names. You know, one of them was Robert,
Mhm.
and that's more akin to the Restelrig line, but who knows at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing we do know about them was there were six knights that accompanied um, Douglas, and two of them were Logans. Pretty important a part of history. So obviously, and Sir Douglas carried the heart of Bruce. So while the crusade did not end in glory, it ended in defeat. They were obviously very prominent. In fact, I'll just read to you. Uh, they were so. According to this book I have, he had on board six knights linked in friendship, neighboring owners from the Stuart domains. And he references the Cathcart papers, and I am putting out a full court effort to see if we can get those papers. Maybe that will shed some more light on things.
Yeah. I
I
did see
want
your email on
to
that.
be
I
the
am very excited. Yeah, I'm very excited to see where we can get with those papers. And not because I think it's going to prove or disprove anything with Logan's of that ilk, but it will be very interesting to find out if there's this source out there that we haven't found yet, which actually is my final question. But that tells us more about the Logan Knights. And here goes Kevin with his heraldry again. There must have been some reason why the Logans of that ilk carry the heart of Robert the Bruce on their registered coat of arms. What that reason is it because the grandchildren of Robert the Bruce said, "Hey, we're going to take the chiefs of that line and we're going to grant that heart to their coat of arms," or did they actually know they were descended from that same one or the other of those two knights that went on the crusade with Sir Douglas? I don't know, but it will certainly be interesting to see what we can find. And like Sean said, there's other material that we've not seen before that might pertain to this particular topic. So I'm excited. Again, I get excited about a lot of this stuff, especially when you start talking heraldry. It's what I love. So yeah. Anything else on the knights? Okay. Uh, so to I think wrap up our discussion today, this is my final comment. All historical documents pertaining to Logans living in Scotland prior to 1800 have or have not been found and thoroughly studied. That's like a softball of a question, but have we found them all? Have we studied them all?
clearly the answer is no. But let me just say that that in no way indicates that John Marchbanks and Peter Logan did not do a thorough job.
Right.
I believe they combed in great detail a vast majority of the documents that could possibly pertain to the Logans of that ilk and or lines that go in and out of them. But we have several things. I mean, I'm going to mispronounce these. So I apologize, but there's Fasti Ecclesia, which is lists all of the Logan ministers. We have there are many volumes to go through, which we have not. There's the exchequer rolls where Logans are mentioned. Sometimes they're cooks that were part of some sort of something that was important, as Caleb was speaking before. And then, of course, there's the Cathcart papers. So um, we've got a lot of work in front of us.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we also skipped a question, Kevin.
Oh, did I?
Did you want to
But
discuss the Gowrie conspiracy?
yeah,
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
curious,
yeah.
Caleb, about what you think about that.
Well, as we speak of things that have and have not been thoroughly researched, what would you like to tell us about the Gowrie conspiracy, Caleb?
Right. Well, so just a little behind the scenes, Kevin had posed the question of, whether the last Robert Logan of Restalrig was a traitor to the crown due to his alleged role in the Gowrie conspiracy. So the Gowrie conspiracy, for those who don't know, was a plot against King James VI of Scotland to kill him. It did not succeed, but it did lead to the forfeiture of the Restalrig lands, which meant that the Logans no longer owned any of that anymore. And we learn a lot from the indictment of George Sprott. He was a notary and he was accused of being in Fast Castle, which was controlled by the Restalrig Logans, and apparently he witnessed message pass between the Robert Logan of Restalrig and the Earl of Gowrie, and those letters implicated him in the Gowrie conspiracy, implicated Robert Logan, I should say.
Mhm.
And apparently, Sprott had read the beginning of a letter, and later on, Logan wanted that letter back and asked for it from another laird, saying either burn it or give it back to me. So then that laird gives it to Sprott, who instead of giving it back to Robert, just decides to keep it. Allegedly, the letter was written in Robert's own hand and signed Restalrig, which was his custom. Later, Logan allegedly paid Sprott 12 pounds of silver to keep him quiet. And after they swore in a three-person jury for the trial of George Sprott, the indictment was read aloud. Sprott admitted the allegations, and the jury convicted him of taking part in the conspiracy. So he was ultimately hung, broken. He was also beheaded, and his head was placed beside the Earl of Gowrie's, so that's a pleasant detail.
Oh,
But
wow.
this comes from the Robert Pitcairn's criminal trials. So
Mhm.
Pitcairn adds on that he found another account of Sprott written in an anonymous volume that was just marked History of the Church of Scotland. I'm not sure
Mhm.
why this is associated with the church, um, but this letter explains that Sprott had been arrested. He was brought before the Lords of Secret Council, so going towards those criminal charges. And then they produced letters found in Sprott's home, written by Robert Logan of Restalrig, who's described as a godless, drunken, debauched man in his time. These letters were not actually addressed to anyone, and
Uh-huh.
so Pitcairn seems to think that this indicated the clandestine nature of the conspiracy. To me, it could equally indicate forgery, as we'll get into later. And they do reference a meeting between Robert Logan and the Earl of Gowrie and the Earl's brother that took place at Fast Castle.
Mhm.
So after revealing these letters, the Lords of Secret Council sent Sprott to the Boots. The Boots were a form of torture. And they said that after that torture, he would be able to better declare the matter. Ultimately, after the torture, he said, Sprott said that the letters were written by Robert of Restalrig, and many people at the time actually thought that that was strange because they didn't think the Earl of Gowrie or his brother would associate themselves with a person like him. In other
Mhm.
words, such a debauched and drunken man as the Laird of Restalrig, as the letter puts it. But everyone who saw the writings and knew Robert's handwriting declared that they were identical, and so that was not quite the end of the matter, but convincing to Pitcairn especially. And Sprott was then again tortured in the boots. After that, he said his confession had been false and that whatever he said afterwards should not be trusted. So that's odd. Now, Pitcairn says in a footnote here that he doesn't think their announcement was real. He thinks it came only because of the torture, because after the torture stopped, Sprott held fast to the facts of his original confession.
Mhm.
But as the story continues, the Lord of Dunbar enters the picture. And here, so George Hume was the first Earl of Dunbar. He was a close confidant of King James VI, and he actually ordered Sprott to be released from prison. He had his legs treated after that torture in the boots, and then Dunbar caused Sprott to come before the council again, where he confirmed the letters were written by him, not Robert. In other words, saying no, the letters were actually forged, but the initial confession was otherwise true. Now, Pitcairn calls this admission of the forgery entirely gratuitous and just an entirely gratuitous assertion on the part of the anonymous writer. But he bases this idea on the number of people who declared the letters bore Robert Logan's handwriting. I don't see myself how that statement is a gratuitous assertion because it literally just describes what Sprott himself said. It's not asserting anything of its own. And Pitcairn also does not consider the animosity towards the Logans of Restalrig, given their role in bolstering Leith at the expense of Edinburgh. So that's another aspect. He also doesn't discuss whether some of the witnesses could have bias because they came at the forfeiture of Robert's land. These declarants were pretty well-known people. So there's the Archbishop Spottiswoode, several members of the Privy Council of Scotland, the ministers of Edinburgh, the Bishop of Galloway, and the bailies of Edinburgh. But even more odd to me is that the anonymous writer refers to the Earl of Dunbar as my Earl of Dunbar. So it could be a respectful term calling him my Earl, but I don't see how a partisan author favoring Gowrie, as Pitcairn described the anonymous writer, would give such deference to this man. So it doesn't make sense to me. And then, as I'll discuss later, Pitcairn also does not pay any attention to the Earl of Dunbar's role in persuading the Lords of Articles to convict Robert Logan. So ultimately, going back to Sprott's death, he again declares his confession was true and that he wanted God's pardon for that, for his role in it. Again, he was hanged, broken, quartered, his head was put up beside Gowrie's. Now, we get to the trial of Robert Logan of Restalrig. This is in 1609. He had died in around 1604 to 1606. Some sources differ on that point, but essentially, a summons was issued against Robert Logan, who was the eldest son of the late Robert Logan and his guardian. So it appears that Robert Logan wasn't even 18 at the time or an adult by standards of those days. And so the young Robert and his guardians actually never appeared, and that non-appearance admitted the summons of treason and left the estate forfeited to the king. Now, nonetheless, they still did have a trial
Mhm.
for the actual forfeiture proceeding, and with that, they brought before the council the late Robert Logan's bones, as if that makes it a fair proceeding for his bones to argue against the charges. But now here we get back to Sprott's involvement, even though he had said that those letters were written by Robert Logan of Restalrig. When the forfeiture proceeding was actually going forward, some of the Lords of Articles were skeptical that there was even a case against Robert Logan. But then the Earl of Dunbar, and this is a quote, he committed himself in a more passionate manner than he usually expresses in common matters. to convince the lords of articles of Logan's guilt. So he gathered the most experienced attorneys to argue the case. He traveled with the nobles. He traveled with the lords of articles. He gave the head prosecutor everything that he needed, leaving him to just repeat the information that the Earl of Dunbar gave him. And that included the letters implicating Robert Logan. So when it came down to the ultimate vote, all the lords found the summons clearly proven, and the forfeiture ultimately did go forward. But with all of that history, in the background of this, it's hard to say i- if we're going by a reasonable doubt, by beyond a reasonable doubt standard for a criminal trial, there's no way that could have been met. And ultimately, I think, it's up to each person whether they think Robert Logan was involved in the plot or not. But the circumstances with the Earl of Dunbar, the forfeiture giving land to King James VI's friends, the animosity towards the Restalrig Logans, the fact that that the only defendant on trial was a skeleton, it paints a pretty clear picture of what happened, in my opinion, at least.
I would, being a Logan, I would tend to agree with you. So I'm unbiased. But no, the picture that you've painted is at least reasonably clear and clearer than what most people had available to them at the time. But in the resources you've put together, and you've done a fantastic job of detailing them, it's clear there was more going on than what they presented at the court when poor man's bones were placed on trial. So, and you look at some of what happened after that as well. I think it was sometime in the next 50 years after he was put on trial, his children were um, children and grandchildren were no longer to be like disassociated from the nobles. They did not get their titles and no, they did not get their lands back. And that was sort of where people began to say, well, wait a minute. If you're saying now that they're free and clear, that this really didn't happen the way it is, and then you have Sprott reversing his confession back and forth several times, it's clear there was a lot more going on there, and it seems as though there's the conspiracy that they wanted his lands and his money. There might be more to it than what we were led to believe. So, yeah.
Right, and actually, this is something that I want to look into what ultimately happened to his family because some people say that they changed their names. At least one source that I saw said that the Logans of Idbury came from the Logans of Restalrig, but that can't be true, given that this all happened. The forfeiture was in 1609. The last laird died in around 1604 to 1606, but it was 1572 when that Robert Logan of Little Two that I mentioned at the beginning actually was in England. So he was, he could have easily been related to the line, but he was not Laird of Restalrig. So it would be interesting to look into that more.
Yeah. So I think with that particular part of the discussion, that really helps paint a good picture to the one that I skipped forward to. And I'm sorry I skipped over that, Caleb. Thanks for bringing us back around to that. But
Mhm.
for people to think that we found all the historical documents that pertain to the Logans prior to 1800, no. And if we had another 50 years, we still might not find them all because there is just a huge amount of historical documents, one to sift through, but there were a lot of Logans. That's what has surprised me as I've done more of this search and stuff, is just how many Logans there were in the Ayrshire area. And that doesn't even discuss the Logans of the Highlands and then the Logans as they came further south into England, and then the Logans who either originated or immigrated, whether they wanted to or not, to Ireland. I mean, the Logans were all over the islands, the British Isles there. So there's a lot more to find out. There's a lot more to discover, and that to me, that's part of the excitement that we were talking about earlier. Is all this stuff you're bringing up, and Caleb, that narrative that you painted around the Gowrie conspiracy, I'm sure it will be a chapter in your book, but as I hope it was clear to people that could be a book all by itself. The history with Sprott, the history with Robert Logan, and why would people call him a drunken and I liked how you said the word debauched man.
Debauched. Yeah.
Yeah, debauched man. Yeah. So there's a lot more to uncover, and there's a lot more to write about and tell people the story about. That to me is very exciting. Do you guys have any final thoughts, Caleb? Any final thoughts as we wrap up here?
Only that the last Robert Logan had a wife who seemingly divorced him. Well, we don't know for sure which way it went. There's a great story about what happened to her family after that and with
Mhm.
the person she married, but I think that'll be for another time. So.
Okay. Okay. Sean?
Yeah, my final thought is this. I'm really looking forward to seeing the two of you at the family convention. I'm looking forward to seeing all the 50 people that are going to be there. And I'll just reiterate, I hope that that is a springboard moving forward to finding our chief and uniting even more as a family. And I thank you all for allowing me to continue to do genealogy on behalf of the society.
Well, on behalf of the Society and Clan Logan worldwide, I want to thank you both for taking part in this discussion today, but even more so for all of the work you've already done and the work you're going to do in the future to help chronicle the Logans and our history. We have a great shared history, and we haven't even started to talk. I need to find a third one of you guys to start doing the modern history of the Logans, because from 1800 forward, the Logans did a lot of stuff in a lot of different countries, and we need someone to tell that part of the story as well. So if you happen to be listening to our podcast and you think you might want to get involved in helping flesh out those stories, let me know. Drop me a line. It's president@clanlogansociety.org. Caleb is heritage@clanlogansociety.org, and Sean is genealogist@clanlogansociety.org. So reach out to any of the three of us, put comments down below this, and be sure to, how do they say it, click like, share, and subscribe to our channel, especially if you want to see more content like this. So thank you both very much for joining with me today. Thank you everyone for staying with us for about the 90 minutes now. And I look forward to talking to you guys on a further in-depth discussion on a couple of these topics. So thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to
Thank
it. You
you.
have a very nice day.